essential at the particular time when homeopathy is getting popular world over. It is said that 500 million patients are being treated world over through homeopathy. In India itself, 1/5 population is getting treated with homeopathy. And about 91 countries, homeopathy is being practiced despite lack of official recognition. So we are progressing. Once we are progressing, anybody who progresses, there has to be opposition. But this opposition has to be taken in a healthy spirit. We have to create documents and various standards, and we have to involve scientists of other disciplines to answer unexplained questions. There are various concepts in homeopathy which needs explanation. So I would like to request the scientists who have some question to ask from Dr. R.K. Manchanda. You can write on a piece of paper, and he will be able to help.
Most of the cases, so they can use mic also if sometime required.
Okay.
So
okay.
Because this is fortunately here we have that kind of possibility.
Is there anybody who wants to ask any question from Dr. Manchanda? Now I call upon Dr. Isaac Golden, who is authority on epidemics. He will be speaking on how to overcome the challenges of epidemic research in homeopathy. Dr. Isaac Golden.
Namaste. I hope I said that correctly. You can hear I'm losing my voice a little bit. I arrived Friday morning at 5 o'clock and then flew to Hyderabad, where we had presentations and meetings, and Dr. Gupta very kindly made sure that I didn't get lost. In fact, I felt like a small child under the guidance of a strict but very kind father at times, as he was leading me through airports and making sure that I didn't leave any of my belongings behind. I'd like to also thank Dr. Manchanda for his kind invitation to come back to Delhi and join you at this conference. Just one thing from his presentation I just wanted to mention, and that is when he talked about the NHMRC study. In fact, they claim, if you read what they say, they looked at 1,800 studies of homeopathy. In fact, they quickly discarded almost all of those. They were left with about 167 that they looked at, and of those, their conclusions were based on 5 studies. They managed to manipulate the way that the studies were entered into their systematic review, and this is one of the major flaws of systematic reviews, that they are easily manipulated by people who have other intentions than really showing the truth. And in fact, one of those 5 was positive of homeopathy. They didn't mention that in their final report. In fact, they discarded dozens of high-quality studies of homeopathy. So please don't pay attention to the NHMRC review from Australia in terms of validating or not homeopathy. They actually had a consulting firm which they subsequently fired because the first evaluation of the evidence was positive to homeopathy. They then got a second consulting firm to evaluate the evidence, who was coming to the same conclusion, that there was positive evidence for homeopathy. And so they then changed the rules of their study to get rid of the vast majority of positive studies. It was a dreadful study. I'm ashamed to, come from the same country. But what I am very happy about is that I didn't come during the test series, because we got a lot of pictures back in Australia of your captain, Mr. Coley, looking very fierce. And I was worried that if I was going to be giving a talk in the middle of the test series, I'd have 300 people sitting there looking like Mr. Coley. But you won, so I hope we're all friends now. So, how to overcome the challenges of epidemic research. It was now the board, I just changed this here and it didn't change on the screen. Can someone help, please? Technical person? It's changing here and not on the screen.
That will change.
Yeah, see, it's different. Oh, what a shame. It changed here.
No, it will change. It will not change here, but it will change.
No, it didn't change on those. Oh, there, now we are.
It will change.
Okay.
I have also used it. But there's some problem. इसको बाद में कर लेंगे. अब तो ठीक है. अब तो सही है.
While they're doing that, I'll just give you an update on what's happening with the NH and MRC thing. There is actually legal action being contemplated. A film was released in London just very recently called Just One Drop. Some of you may have heard of it. It actually outlines some of the things that are happening there. So as soon as you're able to get that in India, I think you'll enjoy it very much. Now it's not even changing on here.
With
Yeah,
this.
yeah, no, I was doing that. Okay. Oh, good. Okay. It's changing now. Good. Yes, we're right. Okay, so the topic itself was too broad to cover in a few minutes. So I've decided that I can best make a contribution by focusing on challenges in research for prevention of infectious diseases. Treatment has many similar points, but also its own special points. So I don't have time to consider both, and I think other people are probably more expert when evaluating treatment requirements. Given that we're assembling today and tomorrow on World Homoeopathy Day, I thought I'd begin and end my brief presentation with a quote from Hahnemann. And this is very important. Both of these quotes come from lesser writings, The Cure and Prevention of Scarlet Fever. And it's very, very important that you do read lesser writings, if possible, because there's many gems there. There's also some strange stuff as well, but Hahnemann made it clear that he thought the prevention of diseases, and we're talking about infectious diseases now, was far better than treating them. So he said, "Who can deny that the perfect prevention of infection from this devastating scourge and the discovery of a means whereby this divine aim may be surely attained would offer infinite advantages over any mode of treatment, be it of the most incomparable kind soever, the remedy capable of maintaining the healthy uninfectable by the miasm of scarlatina I was so fortunate as to discover." So Hahnemann saw, even though he had developed this wonderful system of treatment in homeopathic medicine, he saw preventing disease as being superior to treatment. Now, the general challenge of homeopathy, and I'm talking from, if you like, an Australian point of view, you're very fortunate here in that many of your public officials and your politicians, starting from your wonderful Prime Minister down, support natural medicine and, in particular, homeopathy. I come from a country which doesn't have that advantage, and most Western countries don't. So please, I'm not suggesting that this all applies to your country, but it certainly applies to mine. So for me, the general challenge of homeopathy is that leading medical scientists produce heavily biased and misleading reviews of homeopathy, for example, the NHMRC review. Data is manipulated to obtain predetermined results. Health bureaucrats develop and promote national recommendations based on false data. A compliant mainstream media stifles freedom of speech and publishes false information. Universities make decisions based on economic pressures from pro-pharma lobby groups. Politicians pass legislation based on biased, non-science advice. We see this so often, and this is one reason why natural medicine in general, but homeopathy in particular, has faced so many troubles around the world. But yet with homeoprophylaxis, we have the data. Now, I've been engaged in a little public debate with someone who works at a university, has a very impressive CV, who's basically said that, and made claims in Australia that there are no large studies of homeopathic immunisation or homeoprophylaxis. So I pulled out 8 studies from Cuba, 10 from India and 9 from Brazil. And when you measure the number of persons who have been given homeoprophylaxis by year and by disease, it's over 91 million. Now, in a country as vast as yours, that may not sound like many people, but it actually is a lot by world standards. And certainly, it provides enough data already for us to make convincing arguments to people who are open-minded. Of course, you'll never convince people who aren't. And one thing I should mention, the proceedings document will be released tomorrow, I believe. In there, I haven't put what I've been talking about today. I've put in there the things I was not able to fit into my presentation today. I had about 90 slides and I'll be using about 1/3 of them. So some of the next material I'll be going through very, very quickly, but it will be referenced and described in more detail in the proceedings document when you get that tomorrow. So just very quickly, I just want to share with you the profile, or one measure of the profile of homeopaths around the world who use homeoprophylaxis. And you'll be very interested, I think, to see what the Indian profile is compared to the rest of the world, because it is quite different in some areas. Now, a couple of years ago, some colleagues from Federation University in Australia and I undertook to try and do a survey, and we surveyed well over 1,000 homeopaths from 36 different countries from memory. That's a minute percentage of homeopaths practicing, of course, when you take all of the homeopaths in India, but outside of India it was a reasonable sample for English-speaking countries. And basically one of our aims was to see if a consensus could be reached. The answer was no, it couldn't. But what we could find is a majority position of those who responded. And the majority position said, a majority of homeopaths believe we should attempt to prevent, immunise against, potentially serious infectious diseases using disease-specific remedies, HP, homeoprophylaxis, supported with constitutional remedies where possible. Prevention should be employed when there is a likelihood of exposure to these diseases, using either nosodes or GE remedies, genus epidemicus remedies, as deemed appropriate by the practitioner. Now, that was a majority position of the people who responded to the survey. Now, on this page and the following one, I've just put out a number of characteristics. In bold, the respondents from India, in italics, the respondents from Australia, and in brackets, the average international. Unfortunately, the Indian sample was so small, it does not in any way represent a definitive picture of what Indian homeopaths may or may not believe about this. And in fact, one of my purposes of whizzing across to Hyderabad yesterday was to talk to the chair and leading members of IIHP, and we're hoping to actually do a survey extending on the Federation University survey of their members, which would expand the numbers greatly. But then, if that's successful, and there seems to be value in it, extending that outside of that particular body. So, the clear majority of homeopaths around the world, around 90% at least, believe that we should try and prevent potentially serious infectious diseases, which means, of course, there's about 10% of people who have the view, let the person get the disease and then we'll treat. Now, some people regard that as being the classical position. Well, it certainly wasn't the Hahnemannian position, as you saw from that first quote. Of these, India has the lowest and Australia has the highest percentage who would use disease-specific protection. And when we talk about disease-specific, I'm distinguishing that from general protection like constitutional treatment to prevent specific diseases. 76.1% in India, 96% in Australia. India has the most who would only use HP if there was an epidemic. 67%, the international average was 47.9%. In India, only 60% use or intend to use HP. This is of the respondents, remember, as opposed to 80% in Australia and 74% in the international group. India has an average, and Australia the highest percentage, who had read Hahnemann's essay on the cure and prevention of scarlet fever. Remember, this is the first time that Hahnemann described his use of a potentized homeopathic medicine to prevent an infectious disease. So it's a very, very important essay. Belief that HP is based on the law of similars was above average in both India and Australia. India has amongst the lowest, and Australia has the highest percentage who would use HP for both short-term and long-term prevention. And that was a remarkable difference. This is really significant. 13.4%, 72% in Australia, 62.5% internationally. Now, what this is saying, and I'm very, very aware that most of what you do here is in epidemic situations. What I've been working on with the last 30 years is using it in endemic, not just epidemic situations. Because some diseases, potentially serious ones, are there all the time. Not at the high levels that you might have during an acute epidemic, but certainly at significant levels. And so this is something which India, based on this little snapshot, has not considered. Of course, Hahnemann only used HP for epidemic situations, but then, you know, if Hahnemann had lived another 50 years, we probably would have had 12 editions of the Organon, and God knows how many more advances he would have brought through and changes. So I don't think we should limit ourselves to that. The principle is there. In other words, homeoprophylaxis, just like treatment. The remedies are selected according to the principle of similars, and the remedies are prescribed according to the principle of minimum dose. And as far as I'm concerned, that's what makes something homeopathic. India has amongst the lowest, and Australia has the highest percentage who would use either nosodes or GE remedies. And I know that most of the work that's done in India is using GE remedies, but nosodes have a real place. They particularly have a real place right at the beginning of an epidemic, where a genus epidemicus remedy has not been able to be clearly established. And we know, even if it's established in one region, India is so vast that if there's an outbreak of a particular disease in the north, the GE remedy in the south could be quite different. We don't know. Nosodes have a real place. In some ways, people regard it as lazy prescribing. It's not a matter of lazy, it's a matter, is it based on the similar principle? And the